Hello, and welcome to a Skyrim thing. Since I've done a video about the opening of Morrowind, I thought it would be interesting to take a look at the opening of what's still the newest Elder Scrolls game, nearly 13 years after its release, Skyrim. Skyrim's opening is a dramatically different beast from Morrowind's, and while it's friendlier to newcomers, I find it also introduces some issues, particularly for role players. And I want to talk about that. Before anything else though, I want to address the mods I have installed, because mods change the game and can change one's impression of it. Since this is a retrospective of sorts, I feel it would be irresponsible of me if I didn't mention them. I find Skyrim difficult to enjoy without a few staple mods, and I want to be upfront about them, because, as I said, mods do change the game. As a PC player using a mouse, I rely on Sky UI and a few other mods for sensible menu controls and quality of life more generally. I also use a few mods for visual tweaks, but nothing that changes mechanics in any way. The only eyebrow I can see being raised comes from immersive armors, immersive weapons, and cloaks of Skyrim, all three of which add more equipment variety for loot and NPCs. This added gear doesn't differ dramatically from the stats of vanilla offerings, so I don't feel these mods change the balance of the game, and I find the visual variety is worth the potential minor transgression against developer intent. One more thing before we get into it, this is my first video which is not outright gushing about my love of a game, so I want to try to allay some of the comments I'm sure I'll see on this one. Skyrim is a hugely successful, popular, and influential game. There are few other titles in the history of the medium that have been so culturally prominent at one time or another, and it deserves much of the praise and recognition it has received. I'm planning a video about what Skyrim did right to earn this success, but the short version is that Skyrim excels at creating an atmosphere of Sehnsucht. I think I'm pronouncing that right, which is a wistful longing for an idealized form of something which may not even exist in the first place. In other words, Skyrim's got a vibe. However, returning players will be well aware that I am a Morrow boomer. I started with Morrowind, and as typical for fans of the series, my first remains my favorite, though I've played significant amounts of all the mainline Elder Scrolls games. Except Arena. Dealing with the jankiness that is DOSBox on top of Arena's controls is a bit beyond the pale for me. Seriously, though, my wrist would not survive the ordeal. Each Elder Scrolls game succeeds where others fail, and fails where others succeed. Tracing the path of the franchise, and Bethesda's titles as a whole through the years, is a glimpse into the changing mindset and goals of the developers themselves. Art, and games are absolutely art, is a mirror. Skyrim is a good game. A great one, even. But as a fan of the potential that I've seen in the franchise, it disappoints. When I criticize Skyrim, it is because I want it to be more. It is because I know it could be more. It is because I hold the world of Tamriel very dear, and it deserves more. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's get on topic. Skyrim is complete garbage. No, I'm joking. It's not garbage, but it does have problems. And the way the writing of Skyrim's introduction boxes role players in is top of the list for today because, well, the introduction is the start of the game. Before any opportunity for gameplay or other such mechanical amusements, the player is treated to the infamous cart ride opening, effectively a cutscene explaining the state of the world. In the Fourth Era year of 201, Skyrim is a land of conflict. Civil war rages across the nation, pitting brother against brother in a conflict to decide the sovereignty of Skyrim. It's a great premise, honestly. A civil war setting has an incredible glut of opportunity for interpersonal drama to drive a plot. The problem, as I see it, comes not from the premise of the setting, but how the player is thrust into it. Before the game even begins, certain facts about the player character have already been defined by the writers. While crossing the border from Cyrodiil into Skyrim, we were captured by Imperial soldiers alongside rebel Stormcloaks, including their leader, Jarl Ulfric Stormcloak of Windhelm. So we already have a lot to talk about. And it occurs to me that not everyone watching is going to know what I mean when I say that Skyrim boxes the player in, so let's back up for just a moment and define what role-playing is, or at least what I mean when I use the term. It's been stretched from its original meaning so much by the likes of Borderlands and all manner of other games with RPG elements that I'm not even sure how much meaning the term holds for the average gamer today. And I know pen and paper like D&D players have an entirely different set of requirements that video games are probably never going to reach. As a kid, I would RP walk in games all the time, regardless of their genre. I'm talking Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, Ratchet & Clank, Halo, why not? I've always found it easy to get into the worlds of fictional properties, buying into the necessary narrative conceits that are required for suspension of disbelief to take hold. And at the time, I thought that was role-playing. I was, in a sense, acting a part. Kinda. In more recent years, however, as I've matured and become more aware and critical of the media I consume, I've arrived at a rather different definition of role-playing, and it comes in two parts. Mechanical role-playing is when I, as the player, have different experiences as a consequence of my chosen character. Warriors are bad at magic, mages are squishy, rogues are good at speechcraft, that kind of deal. In a game with good mechanical role-playing, a barbarian and a rogue will have to come up with different solutions to the same problem. This is both interesting in the moment, and is the stuff replay value is made of. More relevant to the topic of this video though, narrative role-playing is the ability for the player to define their character's identity and philosophy through interactions with the world. Mostly, this is in the form of decisions presented to the player and what those decisions say about the character you're playing. To reference my earlier video, do you choose to keep Fargoth's ring, or do you give it back to him? With both a disclaimer and a definition out of the way, it's finally time to dive into the opening cart ride of Skyrim. What is this, like 5 minutes in and we're finally getting around to it? But hey, gotta establish a foundation to build my argument from, right? Let's begin with one of the first things that Ralof says to the player during the cart ride.
You were trying to cross the border, right? Walked right into that Imperial ambush, same as us, and that thief over there.
So, that's interesting. We're heading north, away from the southern border with Cyrodiil, along the road that travels through the Pale Pass. However, the Pale Pass has been all but closed due to avalanches, a convenient contrivance to keep the player in Skyrim. Yet the horse thief and player character were seemingly making their way through, if what Ralof says during the cart ride is to be believed. Kind of weird, but okay. Maybe particularly determined individuals and small groups can still make it through. However, if you side with Ralof during the escape sequence, and we'll be talking about that a little later, he will say this once you get to Riverwood.
Where to start? Well, the news you heard about Ulfric was true. The Imperials ambushed us outside Darkwater Crossing. Like they knew exactly where we'd be. That was 2 days ago now.
Wait a minute, 2 days ago? That means we were unconscious for over 24 hours. Is the player actually in a coma? Are we the Godhead? If you've stuffed this tab into the background, no hard feelings by the way, I do it too, I'm gonna show a map now, so I'm giving you a heads up. You may do with that information what you wish. Darkwater Crossing is in the southern portion of Eastmarch, round about here. There isn't a border crossing anywhere near this area, so one of Ralof's statements is not true. Additionally, the Darkwater Crossing ambush makes the logistics of the cart ride really strange. Why are we heading north from the Pale Pass when that's on the other side of Helgen from Darkwater Crossing? The cart heading to the pass and getting turned around would imply that General Tullius wasn't aware that the pass was blocked, which would be more reasonable if the pass being blocked wasn't the reason he's not getting reinforcements. I'd like to believe he's more capable than that. The Legion is aware of the pass being blocked, at least, as the Imperial missive of Fort Newgrad makes very clear. A rather generous interpretation of this contradiction might arrive at the conclusion that the player character was instead trying to cross the border between holds within Skyrim. I find this theory pretty hard to believe, since the borders between holds are unpatrolled open wilderness, and there seems to be effectively zero border enforcement between them, but it's the best I've got. In any case, this introduction does allow the player the freedom to argue that you're actually innocent, and merely guilty by association by virtue of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. In fact, this might be the only valid conclusion we can come to. For one, a potential character origin of being a Stormcloak or Imperial soldier ourselves is right out. No one recognizes us from either side, though it would have been a neat option to have in character creation. Imagine if there were 3 intro sequences, one each for choosing a pre-game allegiance of Imperial, Stormcloak, or Neutral. Wouldn't even require much more than changing the player's starting equipment and or where they're standing during the executions. But sure, we are necessarily a neutral party. As for the crime we're being accused of, Ralof has pretty strong opinions about thieves, as evidenced both by his comments to Lorik and to the player, if you choose to take the Thief Stone.
Thief, eh? It's never too late to take charge of your own fate, you know.
But he doesn't say anything to us during the car ride. Therefore, it's unlikely our crime was something related to thievery. Beyond that, there's nothing to indicate we're guilty at all. Hadvar has no idea who we are, and the captain has a case of the Mondays and is out for blood.
Forget the list. She goes to the block.
Would it be Tuesdays? Skyrim came out on a Tuesday, after all. Actually, the game starts on a Sunday. Sorry, Sundas. Sundas, 17th of last seed, 4th era 201 to be specific. Like and subscribe for more pedantic lore corrections. Another issue with the way Skyrim injects the player character into the world is that it's fairly inflexible as to character motivation. What was the player doing before Helgen, and what are they doing after? I could try to explain this raw using no references beyond Skyrim, but it's probably more efficient if I instead explain through example. Bethesda's own examples, in fact, how they've injected the player character into their past Elder Scrolls games. As I already mentioned, I have not played Arena, but I have done my research, and it was not easy. Seriously, no one else seems to have played this game either, or if they have, they sure don't talk about it. Even the Imperial Library's page for Arena doesn't have any transcripts of the main quest, despite the page claiming that it does. Bit of a head scratcher, that. In any case, the Eternal Champion, that's the title that's eventually bestowed upon the player, was an unspecified member of the court, later locked in the dungeons by Imperial battle mage Jagar Tharn while he was impersonating Emperor Uriel Septim VII after trapping the Emperor in a plane of oblivion to assume control of the throne. Who you were could be anything, as long as you were reasonably good at whatever it was. As for your future, you're poked and prodded to save Uriel Septim, but you're quite free to do that however you please. In Daggerfall, which I have played an appreciable amount of, as an aside, more people should play Daggerfall. That game is neat. But play it via the Unity engine port if you want to stay sane, and not the GOG version. That's a whole mess that I'm not going to get into, but not that package. It's very out of date. Just mod it yourself if you feel the need. It's super easy. Anyway, in Daggerfall, you are a trusted
subject, ally, and friend
of the Emperor, who gives you 2 tasks. Investigate the death of King Lysandus and put his troubled soul to rest, and find and destroy a letter of a
sentimental and personal nature
that the Emperor sent to the Queen of Daggerfall.
It never arrived.
This intro hams it up so much, and I kind of adore it. During your journey to Daggerfall, your ship is caught in a supernatural storm and is destroyed. You're able to find some refuge in a cave, and you're free to go from there. The agent will be contacted by various others operating in the area, but you are largely left to your own devices for much of your time in the game. And you can easily shirk your responsibilities to the Emperor if you really feel like it. Lady Brisiana will complain, but the only thing that happens is that you can't complete the main quest if you don't start it in time. What you were and what you are is entirely up to the player. Morrowind truly begins the trend of every Elder Scrolls game starting the player off as a prisoner, though the details of your imprisonment are left entirely up to the player to decide. It's even very possible that you were captured under entirely false pretenses so the Emperor can send you to Vardenfell. Once released, the player is given the task of delivering a package to Caius Casades, who promptly tells the player to bugger off and, play Morrowind. The player is then free to come back to the main quest whenever they choose, or start right away if that tickles their fancy. Spoilers, I guess, but you're the chosen one in Morrowind, though the main quest doesn't tell you that right away. That fact is left to simmer for a while. Even better, the requirements that must be met to fulfill the prophecy are things you achieve while playing the game, rather than innate facts about your character outside of your control. The role-playing freedom afforded to the player by Morrowind is very impressive. Oblivion doesn't actually do too bad either. The player character is again imprisoned with no explanation of the charges, leaving the player free to decide the reason themselves. Anything from false charges to foul murder can work just fine. Where Oblivion begins to fall flat is in the urgency of its main quest. There isn't really a good stepping off point where the player can feel free to let the main quest lie and pursue other things. Who you were has great freedom for the player to define their character, but who you are to be is much more rigidly defined. Skyrim, then, locks the player in from both ends. It is restrictive both in who you were and who you will be, and who you will be is the Dragonborn. Again, I think examples are likely to be the best way to go about explaining my argument. A while back, I was playing Skyrim and I made a Khajiit because they're cute. Also, I was planning to go for the usual stealth archer build because I was feeling lazy. But as soon as I left character creation, I decided to instead switch it up to sword and board, which I have much less playtime with, so I thought that would be interesting. Yes, I know sword and board kitty is suboptimal. Fight me about it. Anyway, I then needed an origin. Khajiit are not typically frontline warriors. You know what? Let's have a quick talk about Khajiit in Skyrim. There are only 28 Khajiit in Skyrim. Of those, 4 are either already dead or have scripted deaths almost immediately. Of the 24 Khajiit that can reasonably be expected to live for a few minutes, half of them are members of trade caravans. And of the other half of them are not hostile. Though one is a hostage that you're instructed to potentially put to death, so you can count that however you want. So there's 18 non-hostile Khajiit in Skyrim, and 2/3 of them are in trade caravans. I didn't know those numbers until literally right now, but there are not many cats in Skyrim. Even with all that fur, too damn cold. So if we're going to be a Khajiit, we need to come up with an origin. Since I was going with a melee warrior playstyle, I decided my headcanon was that I was hired on as a guard for a caravan. Simple enough, but I was captured solo. So, okay, the other members of the caravan died in the past, and I kept going without them because I thought I was already more than halfway through, I guess? But I can't join one of the caravans, and going back is mechanically impossible, so coming up with an explanation for why am I in Skyrim and what am I trying to do here quickly becomes difficult. And that's even before the game forces you down the Dragonborn path and overrides anything you came up with anyway. But shortly after we gain control of our character, we will be prompted to make a decision. Do we follow Hadvar the Imperial or Ralof the Stormcloak? Yes, the player's decision in Helgen ultimately doesn't matter, but the game still asks us to make one. And I think it's very interesting that it does, because it's presented to us with incredibly little information to go off at this point. Ralof, despite his disdain towards the late Lokir, has shown us respect during the car ride. Seems a fair enough fellow, if annoyingly talkative and flamboyantly grandiose in his phrasing. The Imperials, however, suck. I'm just gonna let the intro play itself for a bit. The context is important.
You with one of the trade caravans, Khajiit? Your kind always seems to find trouble. Captain, what should we do? She's not on the list.
Forget the list. She goes to the block.
By your orders, Captain. I'm sorry. We'll make sure your remains are returned to Ellsworth. Follow the captain, prisoner.
Ulfric Stormcloak. Some here in Helgen call you a hero, but a hero doesn't use a power like the voice to murder his king and usurp his throne. You started this war, plunged Skyrim into chaos, and now the Empire is going to put you down and restore the peace.
What was that?
It's nothing. Carry on.
Yes, General Tullius. Give them their last rites.
As we commend your souls to Aetherius, blessings of the eight divines upon
For the love of Talos, shut up and let's get this over with.
Learn. As you wish.
Come on! I haven't got all morning. My ancestors are smiling at me, Imperials. Can you say the same?
You Imperial bastards!
Justice!
Death to the Stormcloaks!
As fearless in death as he was in life.
Next, the cat!
There it is again. Did you hear that?
I said, next prisoner!
To the block, prisoner. Nice and easy.
What in oblivion is that?
Sentries, what do you see?
Hadvar seems okay, though his comment on Khajiit has always felt a little tinged with racism. The Imperial captain, however? Yeah, really not painting the Imperials in a positive light here. Like, I know this is an execution, but could she be any less likable? She comes across like she's always miserable. After the attack, Hadvar proves to be a little better, guiding you through the city and towards the keep, which should be safer than being out in the open. In theory, anyway. He's not above calling Ralof a traitor on the way into the keep, though, and this is where we choose a side. Ralof or Hadvar? The two routes, though that description is rather generous, are extremely similar, and I find they mostly differ in their characterization of the player's chosen companion, who has to function as a representative and recruiter for whatever faction they're a member of. Other than the player being by his side, Ralof is acting alone, and he acts like it, cutting an image of a resourceful and scrappy fighter up against a much larger force. This difference in characterization is most obvious during the very first fight, where Hadvar says,
Hear that? Stormcloaks. Maybe we can reason with them. Hold up now. If you want to die, so...
while Ralof takes a decidedly different approach. He just starts swinging.
It's the Imperials! Take cover!
Get this gate open.
us alive!
Understandable, given these people were just about to cut off his head. To Hadvar's credit, the writers tried really hard to make him a sympathetic character. I even think they succeeded, but they still surrounded him with some of the most despicable characters this side of the Thalmor, making him the only likable one of the bunch. Just consider the Imperials we meet along the way. We had a pretty terrible introduction to them, trying to behead us simply for existing in a mountain pass, being kind of racist while they were at it.
Next, the cat!
The very next thing we see of the Empire as a faction is a torture chamber. I mean, gee, who even has a torture chamber these days? The Empire and the Thalmor, apparently. I mean, sure, I guess torture chambers and dungeons are pretty par for the course in any medieval-esque setting. Honestly, I wouldn't raise an eyebrow at it if the torture wasn't such a total creep.
These boys seemed a bit upset at how I've been entertaining their comrades.
Don't you even know?
Don't bother with that. Lost the key ages ago. Poor fellow screamed for weeks.
From here, there's very little variation between the two routes through the dungeon, with many of the voice lines for Ralof and Hadvar being duplicated one for one, which is fair enough. This dungeon also has to play the role of tutorial. Here's looting and equipment, here's combat, here's potions, here's lockpicking, here's archery, here's non-human enemies, here's stealth, archery. Things become a little more interesting again once you experience the Bethesda moment, which completely shoots itself in the foot in the special edition by having a big pop-up about survival mode. Would have preferred to have this right as you were leaving the cave, which would have mirrored how Oblivion asked you to confirm your character choices before leaving the sewers. The walk down to Riverwood itself isn't of that much interest, with most of Ralof and Hadvar's voice lines being completely interchangeable. It's funny to me that both characters say you should split up, then immediately start talking more while leading the player to Riverwood, even stopping and waiting if you fall behind. Technically, we can run off in any direction we choose, but there is a singular prominent path, and it's laced with scripted events to keep you moving in the direction the designers want you to. This is part of how Skyrim keeps you plugging along the main quest, but that's a discussion for another time. We already talked about the problems caused by Ralof's Riverwood scene, and Hadvar has nothing new or interesting to say in his, and this video is probably somewhere over 30 minutes by now, so I think that's as good a stopping point as any. I have more to say about Skyrim in future videos, some of it even positive, but we'll have to wait until next time. And if you made it this far, thank you for sticking around and listening to me ramble. I really do appreciate it. If you want to see more, you know where that subscribe button is and how it works. I also want to shout out my members who are on the screen right now. These people are crazy. I don't know why they're doing it, but I love them for it. But while appreciated, it is never required. Thank you for simply stopping in and listening to me talk about a video game. And as always, have a great one.